In this lesson, we'll cover some of the more advanced tools, as well as go more into depth on tools that have already been covered. Tools such as group and ungroup, note editing, welding, fit object to path, importing, clipping, and masking. We'll cover some new tools that have not been covered, such as instant replay, layers, menu boards, and a little more on using images, including how to trace an image and why this is required. The menu board feature is used to quickly establish a menu layout, and then populate the menu with headers and items. Since menus are usually placed on a single piece of substrate, let's use the sign blank to create the menu. Next, we'll adjust the size. This is done by clicking the Layout pull-down menu and selecting Sign Blank. Let's set the size to 36 inches wide and 24 inches high, and click OK. With menu boards, it's all about planning. So let's now use the guidelines to set the columns. The goal is to set up a menu where items are listed with a different price for small, medium, and large. That would require us to have 2 guidelines for the outer margins and 6 guidelines for the different columns. To place a guideline, right-click on the top ruler. We'll click 8 times on the ruler for 8 guidelines. We won't concern ourselves with the placement just yet. Now we can place them. First, we'll place 2 of them to the outer edges of the sign blank. These will be used as the outer margins. The guidelines can be set by entering a position value. This is done by double-clicking on one of the guidelines. This will open the Edit Guides window. Here, each guideline can be adjusted numerically. We want to have a 1-inch margin. We'll enter 1 inch in the X field for the first guideline, and click the Change button. Notice that the guideline has moved to that new position. Since we know that the sign blank width is 36 inches, we'll click on another guideline and enter 35, and click the Change button. We now have the 2 outer margins. For the rest of the guidelines, they can be visually positioned. We can exit out of this window by clicking OK. From here, the guidelines can all be repositioned to provide guides for the margins. We'll do them visually here for demonstration purposes, but on your own you can position each guideline to an exact location using the Edit Guide settings. Now we can create the menu. Click on the Text Tools flyout, and then click M for Menu Board. Click on the workspace to place the menu. The Create Menu section window appears. Here we can set the number of rows and columns. In this case, we will use 7 rows and 4 columns. Keep in mind that more rows can be added later if need be. Click OK, and the menu table is created. Next is to move the menu so that it is at the top of the sign blank and against the far left guideline. This is achieved by clicking on the Frame tab and adjusting the X and Y values to position it. Let's zoom in a little closer to the menu table. Now the columns can be adjusted and positioned. For each of the menu columns, we can drag its right-hand and left-hand edges into position, using the guides to help with positioning. It's important where the column edge is grabbed. It has to be between the individual text boxes. First, we drag the first column edge and position it, and then the next column, and so on. Now that the menu table is set, the menu fields can be populated. Keep in mind to not be overly concerned with the font or the size. These can be adjusted after the text has been entered. The text is entered, and now it can be adjusted. The top header text should be in bold. the menu item can be left justified. Notice what happens when the text is too long for each field. We simulate this by bringing in one of the columns. It will compress the text just in case too much text is entered. While we have done all this visually, all the column and row settings can be adjusted in the Text toolbox under the Menu tab. This will display the settings for the current column, the spacing before, the width, and the spacing after. It can control the compression as well. Below that is where both rows and columns can be inserted or selected. For instance, if we find that we need to change the font of a whole column, we can place the cursor in one of the cells in the column we want to change. Select the column by this button here, and change the text font for the whole column. Of course, if you have a header, you may have to switch that back. Click on the Selector tool, turn the sign blank off, and there we have the menu board. As you can see, the menu board function is quite powerful. Object order will enable an object to be placed in front or in back of other objects. In other words, it allows them to overlap one another. In certain cases, when objects are overlapping one another, they may need to have their order switched. Take the two objects on the screen. It's obvious that the text should really be in front of the circle. To change the order, first click on the shape whose order needs to be changed. In this case, that would be the text. To change the order of the text so that it is in front, click on the Arrange pull-down menu and select Order. In this menu selection, there is a choice of placing objects to front, in other words, position the selected text in front of all the other objects, to back, where the selected objects are placed behind all the other objects in the workspace, and forward, where the object's relative position is increased in the hierarchy of object order. In other words, forward one layer. Backwards decreases the object's relative position by one layer in the hierarchy of object order. In other words, back one layer. To position, where we can enter the order or the layer number of the position you want the object to be placed in. And finally, reverse. In other words, invert the relative order of the group of selected objects. Conveniently, each choice has their own shortcut key. In this case, though, to front is the best choice. We could also have done it the opposite way by choosing the circle and sending it to the back. When creating shapes and objects, at times there is a need to group objects together to make them into one object. That way, the objects within the group will always be considered as one object. To group objects together, select all the objects that are to be part of the group. Then group them by clicking on the Layout pull-down menu, and then click Group. The objects are now considered as one object. When selecting one of the objects, the group is selected. Notice that when selecting a grouped object, the Smart Bar will reflect this on the left side. To ungroup the objects is nearly the same process. Select a group object, click on the Layout pull-down menu, and then select Ungroup. This will separate the group into individual objects. Since group and ungroup are usually tasks that are often used, it would probably be a good idea to find out the shortcut key for these two functions. To group, press Ctrl-G. To ungroup, press Alt-G. There can be nested groups. Let's select two of the objects, and then group them by pressing Ctrl-G. Now let's select the other two objects and group them as well. Finally, let's select both groups and group them. Here we now have groups within groups, or nested groups. We know how to ungroup them by clicking the Layout pull-down menu and selecting Ungroup. But if we wanted to completely ungroup everything so that each object of the group is separated, we can click on this option, Ungroup All. This will ungroup everything so that each object is on its own. There's another way of grouping objects together, but in a slightly different way. Here is a large circle and smaller circles within the larger circle. There's a large yellow rectangle on the side, but we'll deal with that in a moment. Here's the problem. If the fills are turned on, all we see is one big black circle. The goal here is to have the circles in the middle act as cutouts of the larger circle. To do this, click on Arrange pull-down menu and select Make Path, and notice what happens. It cuts the center circles out, so to speak. To really see what happened, we'll move this yellow square under the circle. And there we have it. The next advanced tool is the Welding tool. Click on the Weld tool just above the Shapes tool, and the Weld tool flyout will appear. Let's drag and park this tool on top, above the Zoom tool so that we can see the effects of the different weld types. The best way to describe each weld type is to demonstrate it. To do this, we'll select these two overlapping objects, and then click Weld. The two objects have been fused together, removing any overlapping portions, leaving just the outline of the two objects. This is best used with overlapping script text, such as brush script. On the other hand, when using the Weld tool when two colors are involved, the color in front will subtract from the color on the bottom. In a moment, we'll see how this can be effective in creating some very interesting effects. The And Weld tool will keep the overlapping area of the two objects. The Exclusive Or will remove the area that overlaps and then leave the rest, opposite of the And Weld. The Overlay Weld takes selected objects of different colors and then spreads one of the colors to fill in the area of all the objects. This is independent of the object order we discussed earlier. Let's demonstrate this. Once the Overlay tool is selected, this Options window pops up. Here it shows all the colors of the selected objects. We're using only two colors to make this easy to see. To determine which color is to be spread out, drag the color to the bottom. In this case, we'll drag the blue to the bottom, and click OK. And notice the effect. The blue object spreads out, so to speak. Let's undo this and click on the Overlay tool again. But this time we'll leave the blue at the top and the red at the bottom in the color order, and click OK. Now the red color spreads out, so to speak. This is a great feature when using two or more vinyl colors that overlap, and you want to remove that seam that often shows up when using the bleed method. Next, we'll cover several different types of functions and tools in combination, using guidelines, the Ginsu knives, and using alignment. This will help to get a better understanding of how they each work and how they are used. The final goal is to create a graphic such as this. The first goal is to make copies of this long rectangle or strip, align them, and then space them out evenly. To do this is a pretty simple task. To make copies, we'll select the rectangle or strip and press Ctrl D 3 times to create 4 copies. Move them closer together and then select the strips. The strips need to be aligned and spaced out evenly. To do this, click on the Layout pull-down menu. Select Align and Distribute, then select Alignment. Up in the Smart Bar, there are different options for aligning the objects. On the left, there are choices of what to align the objects to, whether it's the sign blank, the grid, the last object selected, or the current selected objects. We'll choose the last one, Current Selected Objects. In the middle are choices for how the objects are to be aligned: top, middle, bottom, left, center, right, and none. In this case, to align them vertically, we'll click on Center. Now they are aligned perfectly. They also need to be spaced out evenly from top to bottom. The last two buttons will distribute objects evenly, whether vertically or horizontally. In this case, we'll choose the top button, vertically. Now the strips are perfectly aligned and spaced out evenly. Now they need to be grouped, so we'll press Ctrl G. Next, we'll select both the strips and the lettering and align them together. Pressing Alt K will get the Smart Bar to display the alignment options again. With both strips and text selected, we'll click on the far left button to align them to the sign blank, and then click on Align to center both in the horizontal and then the vertical direction. Next, we'll use the Ginsu knives to slice the ends. But before we do that, let's examine what the Ginsu knives accomplish. At the bottom of the screen are two circles we will use for demonstration purposes. To access the Ginsu knives, let's click on the Effects toolbar flyout. The first two tools are the Ginsu knives. The tools are grayed out because an object has to be selected prior to using the tools. But the first Ginsu knife will keep the sliced objects as open. The second Ginsu knife will keep the sliced objects closed or as whole objects. This will become apparent as we demonstrate these tools. To show how these tools work, we've turned on the fills so we can see the effects of each Ginsu knife. We'll select the first circle and select the first Ginsu knife. To operate this tool, click on the first point and then click on a second point. This creates a line that represents where the slicing is going to take place through the object. We could continue drawing the slicing lines, but in this case, we'll stop the Ginsu cutting by pressing the spacebar. This creates two separate open objects. Remember, open objects are where the two ends of a shape will not meet, and thus cannot be filled, showing it to be an open object. As mentioned, the next Ginsu knife will slice through the object, but keep the objects closed. Using this tool is done in the same manner. First, select the second circle, and then click on the second Ginsu knife. This time though, we'll create several slices by clicking on different points. Once again, to finish, we'll press the spacebar. Here, the slices can be separated and they are kept as closed or whole objects. We know this because all the pieces are filled. Let's remove the sliced circles and work on the graphic. And zoom in on the graphic above. On this graphic, we'll use the second Ginsu knife to slice the edges of the strips. The goal is to slice the end of the strips at the same angle as the edge of the M in Mr. To do this, a guideline has to be put in place and rotated to the angle of the M. To use a guideline is a matter of clicking once on the upper ruler with the right mouse button. Next is to angle the guideline. At the edge of the guidelines, there are these grab handles. They're represented by a thicker black notch, so to speak. By clicking on them and dragging both the bottom and the top, the guidelines can then be rotated to match the exact angle of the M, or the edge of the M. Since the strips need to have both sides sliced, we need to place a second guideline at the same angle. Instead of dragging a guideline from the ruler and angling it, the current guideline can be duplicated. This is simply done by clicking the guideline, holding the Control key, and then dragging the guideline. This makes another guideline at the same angle. saving us some steps. The guidelines can now be adjusted to the edge of the strips. We first select the strips, select the second Ginsu knife. Now the second Ginsu knife can be used for slicing. The tool will snap to the guidelines, helping us to slice at a perfect angle. The two ends can now be deleted. Thus, we have angled edges on the strips. Next is to slice the strip area on each side of the lettering. We can just move the current guidelines to each end of the lettering. We need to select the strips, but they have been ungrouped. To group them together again, hold the Control key, and with the Selector tool, draw a marquee. To group them again, press Ctrl G. Once again, using the guidelines, we can slice through the two ends of the inner strips. Our next goal is to make the lettering striped. To make this work, the strips will have to be grouped again. First, select the strips. To do this, hold the Shift key while clicking the 4 strips. Next, group the strips together by pressing Ctrl G. Then subtract the strips area from the lettering. To do this, we'll first change the strips to a red color. If you remember, when using the Weld tool with objects of different colors, it will subtract the front object from the back object. Let's select the text as well by holding the Shift key and clicking on the text. All there is to do now is to select and delete the strips, and remove the guidelines. This is done by double-clicking on one of the guidelines, and then click Delete All. As you can see, this gives a really neat effect. With these tools, you can get really creative. This next demonstration will show how to import files, and also show some advanced node editing. To import a file is very simple, but let's discuss why importing is done. Importing allows you to import files that were designed in other graphics applications such as CorelDRAW, Adobe Photoshop, or Adobe Illustrator. To import a file, you simply click on the File pull-down menu and then select Import, or click on the Import button in the toolbar above the workspace. The import window works similarly to opening a file. The first step is to locate the file to import. Next, select the file type. DesignR PRO 2 provides an extensive list of import filters that can be used for importing. This is helpful when there is a large amount of files in a folder to search through and you can't remember the name of the file. In this case, we'll just choose All Files. Select this GraphTech AI logo, which is an Adobe Illustrator file, and click Import. Before importing the file, the software will expect us to select an area to place the object. That's why there is this corner bracket, which, once clicked, will place the upper left-hand corner of the image at that spot, and then just draw everything out from there. This logo is fine, but if we turn off fills and take a closer look at the logo, it needs to be cleaned up a little. Let's zoom into the letter G. There are wavy lines where there should be straight lines. This logo was originally an image that was traced, which will be covered later in this lesson. First, let's ungroup this logo by clicking on the Layout pull-down menu, and then clicking Ungroup. Let's now deselect the object by clicking just outside the object. We'll now enter the node editing mode by double-clicking on the G. In the Smart Bar, we can select the Segment Edit button. Let's start with cleaning up the corners. And this little red circle appears and will move with the mouse. It's there to make sure that the correct segment is selected. Select the first point of the first segment. Click the mouse, and the first segment is selected. We can move to the second point and click the mouse. This next step may seem tricky, but click and hold the right mouse button down, and these little icons appear. Let's stop and examine each of these. The top left icon is the cornering tool. This will create a corner out of the segments you've just chosen. The top right is the Arc Curve tool, which will create an arc of the two segments that have been chosen. The bottom left will delete the segments that have been chosen, and the bottom right is the tool that will straighten the lines of the segments that have been chosen. The middle icon will create guidelines out of the 2 points that have been chosen. In this case, we'll need to choose the corner tool. So while still holding the right mouse button, hover the mouse over the corner tool and then release the right mouse button. Several grab handles in red will appear. The corner can be adjusted by using the 2 grab handles out here. Once adjusted, click Apply in the Smart Bar. Next is to straighten out some of the lines. Once again, we can select the section of line that needs straightening. Select the first point, and then the second point, taking notice of the little red circles. Click and hold the right mouse button, hover the mouse over the straighten line icon this time, and then release the mouse button, and the line is straightened. Let's round out the curves a little better. We'll click on the 2 points on the arc. Click and hold the right mouse button, hover the mouse over the little arc, and release it. 2 grab handles will appear. We can use these to adjust the curve of the arc. Once it is in place, click Apply, and it sets the new arc. From here, we can continue cleaning the logo. In this next demonstration, we'll discuss some creative things that can be done with images. Images are objects such as photos downloaded from a camera, or logos that are either scanned in or taken off the internet. Images do not have any line information, just pixels. One of the more powerful DesignR Pro 2 features is its ability to clip an image. To demonstrate, here in the workspace is an image with some text. Let's drag the text over the photo. Then, selecting both objects, click the Arrange pull-down menu, select Clipping, and then Clipping again. And here is the result. Notice the shortcut keys of Alt-C to clip the image and Alt-U to unclip the object. Keep in mind that clipping can be used on vector or line objects as well. On the workspace, there are a multitude of shapes that are grouped together and some text. Let's first draw an ellipse. Now let's move it toward the center of the group shapes. Select both objects, and then clip the shapes using the ellipse. Once again, we can use the shortcut keys Alt-C to clip it. For a nice effect, the text can be positioned over the newly clipped object. Change it to white, resulting in a festive sign. Keep in mind that you can clip any object as long as the object that is being clipped is behind the clipping path. The logo that is on the screen is clip art that is a JPEG. The goal is to clip the artwork so that the white space can be removed, leaving just the shapes behind. We could hand draw around the shapes of the apple, but in reality this would take time. So the next tool we will discuss will help us with this kind of situation. It's using the Accu Scan tool. The Accu Scan flyout toolbar is the button that looks like a prism just beneath the node editing tools. It contains 2 different tracing tools. We'll be using the first tool, the Accu Scan tool. Here we have an image of an apple. The goal here is to first mask the image to remove the white space. The second goal is to separate the trace line. To achieve these goals, we need to select the image, in this case the apple, click on the Accu Scan flyout toolbar, and then the Accu Scan tool, which is the first button. This opens the Accu Scan options in the Smart Bar. On the left side, there are several tools for selecting portions of an image. For this demonstration, we'll use the magic wand, but first we have to set up this tool. Clicking on the magic wand setup button does this. This opens a little dialog box with settings for the magic wand. Here we want to set the radius to 36. This is usually a good number to start off with. In your own testing, if you find that too much of the image is selected, then lower the number. If not enough of the image is selected, then raise this number. Click OK. While holding the Shift key, select all the black pieces of the image. If you have a simple image with only one element, it is sometimes faster to select the white area and then invert the image using this Invert Selection button here. Once an outline is around all the black areas, finish by clicking on the scissors in the Smart Bar. As you can see, there is the shape of the apple, but we don't have all the white space. Let's turn on the grid so we can see the effect. You can see how useful this can be when placing an image with a lot of white space in a logo object. But there's more. When this type of process is done, what DesignR PRO 2 does is make a clipping mask. Watch what happens when we unclip this. To do this, click on Arrange pull-down menu, select Clipping, and Unclip to unclip the apple. Next, let's deselect the apple. Click on the outside so we select the bitmap. Move it to the side. Turn fills off. And there we now have a traced vector version of our apple. Accu Scan has other powerful tools that can be used as well. This is especially so when tracing multicolored images. Here is an example of a multicolored logo that has been imported into the workspace. Recall that cutting devices such as CE6000, FC8000, and other Graphtec cutters only understand vectors or line information and not images. Therefore, this image has to be traced, or what is sometimes called vectorized, into a couple different colored shapes. The image has been selected, so let's open the Accu Scan tool. To quickly access Accu Scan, double-click on the image. In this example, we also need to trace the 3 different colors. To make this easier and more efficient, we will have to posterize it prior to tracing the image. Most images where there seems to be only 3 colors could have variations of color or forms of gradation within the one color. Posterize is a process of reducing an image to a relatively small number of colors, solidifying each color. In this case, we want all these colors to be converted into 3 separate colors. On the Smart Bar, there's this button that will posterize the image. By the way, Accu Scan will not allow us to vectorize any image without first posterizing it, so always press this button prior to tracing an image. This dialog box asks how many colors do we want to reduce this image to. In this case, we just want it to be the 3 colors, but just to make sure we get everything, let's select 5. This checkbox, when enabled, will try to sharpen the image during the posterization process. The posterization settings are where we want, so let's click OK. For better results, we can tell DesignR PRO what kind of graphic it is. That's the purpose of this pull-down button here. For instance, if we had text to trace, there is a setting for this, and it would actually look for the best ways for tracing the text. In this case, though, it is a logo, so the setting should be long lines and curves. Now it's all set for tracing. To trace the image, click on this button, and there it is. It is a pretty quick process. Let's separate them and compare the two. Let's also turn on the fills. Notice that the Accu Scan has straightened out the jagged edges of the lines. This is why we selected the long lines and curves so that we could get this effect. Here on the screen is a large star with a smaller 8-point star next to it. The goal of this demonstration is to make copies of the smaller star and position them along the path of the larger star's shape. One way to do this is to make copies of the smaller star and place them around the larger star. But there's an easier way to get this effect. First, select both stars. Keep in mind that the smaller object will always be the object that follows the larger object's path. In this case, the smaller star will follow the larger star's outline path. Next, click on the Transform pull-down menu, and then click Fit Object to Path. In this window, there are several options for laying out the smaller objects. Number of copies will space out the number of copies evenly along the path. Object spacing will determine the number of copies based upon the spacing between each copy. Nodes will place the smaller object copies on each node or corner. Using rhinestones will be covered later in the lesson Creating Rhinestone Patterns. The lower half of the window has two settings. One will rotate each object, and the other, Follow Contour, rotates each object to align itself to the direction of the path. In this case, we'll choose Number of Copies, set the number to 35, and click OK. The larger star can then be deleted, leaving the smaller stars in the pattern of the larger star. Here we have a line of text. The goal is to place this text so that it fits to a circular design below. This means that the text has to be bent perfectly to fit an arc shape. This is where Fit Text to Arc is a perfect tool to use. This is achieved by selecting the text, clicking on the Transform pull-down menu, and selecting Fit Text to Arc. Immediately, the text is on an arc. It now has to be adjusted. Notice that there are several grab handles that can be used to adjust the shape of the arc. The center grab handle below will move the text to a new location. Let's click and drag on it to move it toward the center of our design. Notice that we have placed two guidelines to help align the arc to the center point of the circle. Next are these three grab handles. The top and bottom handles will reshape the arc by changing its radius. The middle grab handle will change the angle of the arc. We'll use this in a moment. Notice too that the text sometimes has to be repositioned. There are also settings in the Smart Bar to adjust the angle and the radius. There are 4 different buttons in the Smart Bar that will position the text in different ways. First, there is the current setting, which is arc up from the baseline, and second, arc up from the top. Notice here that the text is placed within the outer arc. Thus, this would allow us to position the text to the outer circle. Next is arc down from the top, and arc down from the baseline. If the invert button is clicked, then the text will be arced as if its baseline and top line were swapped. Now we can use the arc angle grab point to drag the text to the top again. Next is another powerful feature that iDesigner offers, Instant Replay. Not only will it copy the actions and operations from one object to another, it can edit or remove any operations that have been applied to objects. In the workspace here, there are 3 lines of text. The top line has several actions and special effects applied to it. The first goal is to change its shadow from light aqua to black. Once that is done, the next goal is to apply all of the special effects and actions to the last line of text below. Imagine trying to achieve any of these manually. To say the least, this would be a daunting task of recreating the color, size, and settings. To open Instant Replay, click on the View pull-down menu and select Show Instant Replay, or press the shortcut key Alt-I. In the Instant Replay options window, to change the block shadow color of the first line, click on the object listed to be changed, in this case the first line of text. Then in the operation box here, double-click on the block shadow. When we do this, the Instant Replay options window disappears and the Smart Bar will now display the settings for adjusting the shadow. In this case, it's to change the shadow color to black. Once that's done, click Accept. This will make the changes switch back to the Instant Replay options window. The next goal is to copy the shadows and the attributes of the first line of text and apply it to the bottom line of text. In this case though, we'll want to copy the drop shadow, the line style, and the color of the text, but not the distortion. To do this, select the actions to copy, the outline, and the block shadow. They can now be brought over and hovered over the bottom line of text. When the large down arrow appears, release the mouse button. And there it is. Imagine the amount of time this will save. As you probably well know by now, the workspace is a visual display of a design, displaying objects such as shapes, text, and images. A sheet layer is a subset of the workspace. There can be multiple sheet layers that are like multiple layers within the workspace. Those subsets can be viewed just below the color palette. Sheet layers are helpful when working on a complex design, where portions of the design need to be disabled or turned off, so to speak, so that objects that need to be worked on are more accessible. Sheet layers can also be used when comparing different versions of a design. To demonstrate how this works, by default, shapes are placed on sheet layer 1. To edit or add new layers, double-click on layer 1 to open up the sheet layer options window. Here we can name the current layer. In this case, we'll change the layer name to background. And then click Change. We can double-click on the layer again and type in text as the name. This time though, we'll click Add instead of Change to add a new layer labeled Text. Let's double-click on the background layer again and create one more layer and label it Shapes, and click Add. The next step is to move the objects from sheet layer 1 to different layers just created. This operation is similar to changing the colors of an object. First, select the object or objects to be assigned to a layer. In this case, we'll select all the inner shapes, and click on the Shapes layer plate. And the objects are now assigned to that layer. Objects can also be assigned to a layer by moving a layer plate from the Sheet layer palette to an object in the workspace. Let's do this for the background and text. First, we'll click and drag the background layer to the workspace. And once the plate is over the red background object, release the plate. We can do this for the text as well. Click and drag the text layer plate to the workspace. Once the plate is over the text, release the plate. This will assign the two objects to their respective sheet layers. What's helpful about this feature is that if we want to view the objects on a given layer, the other layer can be disabled or hidden. To disable a layer, hold the Control key down on the keyboard and click on the layer to disable or hide. This can be done to the other layers that need to be hidden. A hatch pattern will be superimposed on the sheet layer plates that are disabled. All objects of a disabled layer will then be hidden. To enable that layer again, hold the Control key and then click on that layer. Clicking on a layer while holding the Shift key will turn all the other layers off. The next tool is a quick and easy way of rounding out corners on vector objects. In this demonstration, the goal is to round out the corners of each object, giving it a unique shape. This can be done by using the Round Corner feature. First, select the object, which in this case is the star. Next, click on the Transform pull-down menu, and then select Round Corners. In the Smart Bar, we are given a choice of rounding out the outside corners, which is the first button, or rounding the inside corners, which is the second button. Let's click on the first button to round out the outside corners. In this field, the radius of the corner can be set. Let's increase the radius value of the rounded corners to 0.2. Then click Apply, and then Close. The next step is to round out the inside corners. We'll click on the Transform pull-down menu once again, and then select Round Corners, and this time we'll select the second button in the Smart Bar to round out the inside corners. We can increase that radius value to 0.6. Watch the inside corners of the star. And now we can click Apply. It's a nice effect, giving us a unique shape for the design. This feature will work on any shape with sharp corners.